Well, this is going to be a short video because the vector class is essentially a thread-safe array list. But vector actually came first. We're going to take a look at the vector Java doc, and we'll see, if we scroll down a bit, that vector has been there since the beginning. It has been in the JDK since JDK 1.0. If we come up to the top here, now if I go back to array list, so this is the array list class, we'll see that that was only added into the JDK in JDK version 1.2. Now, if you've been using Java as long as I have, you might remember when ArrayList was introduced. Before that, the list goto class was vector. And so the question is, if vector was in JDK version 1.0 and it has pretty much the same methods as the ArrayList class, why was ArrayList added to the JDK? Well, the answer lies in the documentation. If we scroll back up, we'll see right here in big bold letters for ArrayList, this implementation is not synchronized. And if we go back to the vector class, it says, unlike the new collection implementations, vector is synchronized. So vector is thread safe, meaning it's okay to use it from different threads without you having to synchronize the code. But ArrayList is not. So if you only read an array list, then it's safe to use it from multiple threads. No data will be clobbered. But if you use array list with multiple threads and one or more of those threads is writing to the array list by adding, deleting, setting, or changing objects in the list, then you could run into a conflict. You could have threading conflicts. And so in that case, you'd want to use vector rather than array list. So if you need thread safety, use vector. If you don't, use ArrayList. Now the reason that ArrayList came along is that synchronization has an overhead involved. So it slows things down. And so when only the vector class was available and vector is synchronized, if you wanted to use a list backed by an array and you wanted to use the class in the JDK, you were pretty much forced to use a synchronized class, even if you didn't need synchronization. And so because of that, ArrayList was eventually added to the JDK so that if you don't need synchronization, you would have a class backed by an array that you could use that doesn't have the overhead involved with synchronization. And so that's why ArrayList came along. It was because developers were saying, hey, we like vector, but what do we do if we don't need synchronization? We don't want the overhead associated with it. And so a couple of versions later, ArrayList came along. And so here you'll see that the documentation for ArrayList itself says if a thread-safe implementation is not needed, it is recommended to use ArrayList. So you only want to use the vector class if you need synchronization. If you don't need it and you use the vector class, you're going to be using a slower implementation for no reason. And that's why you want to use ArrayList unless you need a thread-safe implementation. So if you need thread safety, use vector. If you don't, use ArrayList. Okay, so let's say we do want to use vector. Well, vector is backed by an array, just like ArrayList is. And so let's go back to the IDE now. And I've created a project and I've added the same employee class we had in the ArrayList video. Same field, same everything. I basically just copied and pasted it from that project. And right now I have this using an array list. Now, if we want to use vector, because we're assigning this into a list employee instance rather than array list employee, all we have to do is change this to vector. Because vector also implements list. And so that's why rather than using a specific implementation, in the declaration, it's always better to use the interface that the implementation is using, because then you can switch out to another class that implements the same interface without having to change any code. So let's take a look at the vector constructor. Let's go to the declaration and let's go to this. We'll have to follow this down until we finally get to the actual code where it's doing the work. We'll keep going. And here we are, and we'll see that an array is created. So it's using a backing array, just like ArrayList is. If we go back to main now and we take a look at the the implementation of add. And this time I want it for vector. There you go. It's synchronized. And so that's the difference between the add method for ArrayList and the add method for vector. Let's have a look at the ArrayList add method. I'll go to the other project, the other IntelliJ project for ArrayList. So here we are back in the project we worked with in the last video, and if I go to this add method, I want the ArrayList add, we'll see that there's no synchronized keyword here. And so I want to reiterate that if you don't need thread safety, then don't use vector. You don't want the overhead that comes with synchronization. And if you do need thread safety, then you want to use vector rather than using ArrayList, because if you use ArrayList, then you're going to be responsible for synchronizing all the calls to ArrayList methods. And so why do the work when the vector class has already done all of that for you? And that's it. That's all I'm going to say about vector, because it's pretty much the same as an ArrayList, except it's synchronized. The last two videos about ArrayList and vector, they've probably been review for some of you. I just wanted to make sure that we covered the two most popular classes in the JDK when it comes to just having a simple sequential list. So in the next video, we're going to move on to another type of list called a linked list. I'll see you there.